For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He, the Son, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. This is the word of our God. Who is Jesus? That is the question. People have all sorts of different ideas. Here are some answers that were given on America's streets. I found on different video clips that were posted online. In reply to the question, who is Jesus? There were many who had a correct answer, but among the answers were these replies. He probably existed, but I don't believe he was the Son of God. Who is Jesus? Who was he? He was a man. Another woman replied, who is Jesus? He is a spiritual leader, and one of the spiritual leaders I learned from. Who is Jesus? A long pause, and a very intense look, and then a reply from a man saying, see, now you want to start trouble. There's a lot of confusion, right? And even controversy. But no, we don't want to start trouble with this question at all. Our only desire is that we and others have the clarity that God gives on this very issue. And here's a good place to start to get clarity. Who is Jesus? I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. This is the one thing we must not say. Did you wonder where that quote was going at first? You see it now? Let's spend a few moments here together on this Christ the King Sunday to talk about this. Who is Jesus? And what does it matter? What does it matter to you? Someone who is outside of Christianity looking in might still know some things that are recorded in the Bible. Like maybe they know the account of Christmas, we're coming up to that, and so they might, if that's what they know, and they don't know much more, they might think, well, isn't Jesus, wasn't he born in Bethlehem? And so they might think that he came onto the scene at that time as a baby in Bethlehem. And if they think that, then they're missing, well, I've got something here to point out what they're missing. Gentleman asked, but don't you have to read a long way through the Bible before Jesus even shows up? Nope, is the reply. How far? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4 words. In the beginning, God. Now, what if we go from just taking the general public on the street and we narrow down the scope and ask who is Jesus to those who identify as Christians? Do you think all confusion will be gone? You'll still find some. In a study done here in America this last year, some of you have heard some of these, but this is a new one. The first one you've heard maybe before. Those who responded, over 70% identified as Christian, but just over 60% agree that Jesus is truly God and truly man. And then, under less than 50% agree that Jesus is eternal, that he's always existed. The question, in fact, that the statement, in fact, that 50+% agreed to was this, that Jesus, in their view, Jesus is the first and greatest creature created by God. You see that they put Jesus back further than Bethlehem. They're saying he already existed before the creation of everything else, but that's not far enough to go back in time to find out who Jesus truly is. That doesn't work. Created is not a description of who Jesus is. Who is Jesus as you've come to know him, as you've come to know the truth from right here in God's Word? We say it in words explaining the second article like this: I believe that Jesus Christ is true God from eternity. He is also true man, born of the Virgin Mary, so he came in time and he became man in order to save us, and he is my Lord. You learn that from the pages of the Bible, like the page that's in front of us here in Colossians chapter 1. If we were to take all of the evidence the Bible gave for this truth, we could write a whole book and we could spend all day talking here about it. We're going to limit ourselves somewhat to mostly those statements and descriptions right here in these verses from Colossians and a few other passages drawn in. What are we told? Soak in the answer to who is Jesus. Now, we make a statement of who he is in every Sunday service here, but it's not always that we get a chance to dig into a passage or a section that details and unfolds this truth before our eyes. Here we do. Take a look at the statement in verse 15, for example. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Understand, that is saying more than he's just a resemblance to God or some kind of reflection of God. It's saying, if you see Jesus, you see God. Jesus is God. In order to explain this to Philip one time, Jesus said, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. And speaking to a wider audience once, Jesus said, I and the Father are one. And the group that was gathered there understood exactly what Jesus was claiming, because they replied, you are claiming to be God. Now, not everyone agreed. Not everyone accepted that, but it doesn't change the truth. That is who Jesus is. In verse 19, the fullness of what is meant in this is brought out in words. All the fullness of God dwells in him. And then chapter 2 comes back to this truth when it says, in him, Jesus, dwells all the fullness of the deity in bodily form. He is fully God. And so the conclusion that we're given in John chapter 5, and that God would want for us, desire for us, is that all honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever doesn't honor the Son doesn't honor the Father who sent him. Now this helps us understand the second statement that's made in verse 15, where it says Jesus is the firstborn over all creation. Again, understand, firstborn is not saying first created. Those are vastly different. Created is never used as this description for Jesus. The term here, firstborn, is expressing the eternal relationship between God the Father and God the Son. He is eternal. He's existed for all eternity along with the Father and the Spirit, our triune God. And the fact that he is eternal is shown in the descriptions of his rule and his reign given in verses 16 and 17. We're told how he is above all else. Now, think about that. In the Bible, of who alone is that description given? That they're over everything? God. The God who says, I am God and there is no other. And we go on and we find out the description here. By him, Jesus, all things were created. Again, in the Bible, who alone is credited with creating everything? God. This is who Jesus is. Romans says Christ, who is God over all. God the Son from all eternity, who became man in time in order to rescue us from sin and from hell. Of course, we come to the time when Jesus is fastened to a cross. And we see him humiliated and insulted and bleed and die. And if someone just sees that and doesn't follow through to see what happens next, they may walk away thinking, it sure doesn't look like he has the power of God. Sure looks instead like he's pretty weak. But he broke death's hold on him on the third day. And so we have the description here. He is the firstborn from among the dead. Don't miss this as the culminating and weightiest piece of evidence for who Jesus is. My friends, Jesus is not on the cross and he is not lying somewhere in a tomb. He is alive. And he is ruling over all things, and he is the head or leading us, his church. Verses 18 to 20 tells us how Jesus' rule, which extends over all of the universe, it extends over us, his church, people who believe in him in a special way. He is king and lord over the church, and his rule over all things always brings about the eternal good of those who are his people. He's promised that, and he makes it happen. So now let's just take a moment to do some soul searching for the ways that we fail to give him the honor and the glory that he rightly deserves. Came across a quote. If you say, I believe in God, I trusted God, and he didn't come through, then you only trusted God to meet your agenda. Now stop and think about that for a moment. He is our king, not our pawn. Now you might not ever say in your mind that I'm equal with God, or I am above God. But how often do you treat him as an equal, or even as someone who should take advice? If we feel that God has failed us simply because he hasn't met our expectations in something, we're turning to him more as a pawn to do our bidding than giving him the honor and the trust and the glory he deserves as king and ruler. He is supreme, and he is undying in his love to us. He is our king who gave himself for us. And so, for all the times that we've trusted our thoughts above his thoughts, doubting his intentions or doubting him and his ways, for all the times we've wanted our way above all else, including his way of handling us and the circumstances in our life, if we felt disserviced or disgruntled toward him, we come clean. And we say, Lord, forgive us for all of our sins. And we turn to him, and we rely on him as the only rescue. As we're told about that rescue here in Colossians, verse 13 and 14. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He did that, we're told in verse 20, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So, I'm going to play a song for you, and it's going to take about 3 minutes here. And it caught my attention this last week, and I think more than just for the uplifting melody. Events from Jesus' life unfold in the lyrics, and they point out who he is. Here, take a listen. Put it back. Come on. There you go. I don't know if you can see the words, and I don't know if you could make out all the words. I know there's a lot of content in there. So maybe let's just take a moment for those who maybe picked it up or can see this. And kids, if you catch on to these and spot these first, you can call them out. What events are talked about in each of the verses? The first verse, you have you're on a riverside, you're on the bank of a river, and there's water poured, and then a voice calls from heaven. Baptism, okay? Got it. The day Jesus was there and God the Father called from heaven, "This is my Son." Verse 2, you have an event where you've got 6 jars filled with water, but something happens. Wedding, Jesus is invited to, and he changes the water into wine. The first of his miraculous signs, which revealed his glory to us and his identity. Now, verse 3, the sun is outshined by something else on a mountaintop, and again a voice from heaven thunders, and this is Yeah, this day where Peter, James, and John catch a glimpse of Jesus' divine glory shining through on the mountainside. Verse 4, another mountainside event or hillside event where clouds hide Jesus from sight. His ascension. Now, I didn't put the theme up here, the title up here, and sometimes in our hymns, the title is the first line, we stand and we watch, but in this case it's not. Anybody want to take a guess? That's kind of a tough one. It's right down there, actually, the underline is supposed to be a little higher. Christ begins, and at first it might be a little challenging to think through. It makes sense for the first verse, right? His baptism. This is where Jesus begins his public ministry, and he goes and he teaches publicly who he is and shows through his miracles publicly who he is. Christ begins. But does it work as a description all the way through to his ascension? The answer is yes. And beyond. The opening of the book of Acts holds a description similar that is such a comfort to us. Luke talks about how he recorded Jesus' life in the gospel, and he describes it like this. He recorded all that Jesus began to do until he was taken up to heaven. Do you see the comfort of Christ begins and the comfort that we've heard here on Christ the King Sunday? I have not asked you today to consider the question, who was Christ? No, we are asking, who is Christ? He is my King. Because he is not dead. He is alive. He is not absent. He is present here. And he is not removed from the events that are taking place in our world. And he has not left us, his people, to fend for ourselves. He is our King. And he lives. And he speaks to the Father in our defense. He is Jesus, our righteousness. Trust him. Trust in him as your way to the Father, as your way to heaven. And thank him. Listen to him. Listen right here as he feeds your soul, strengthens your faith with his truth. And look forward to the day when, with all who believe in him, you will stand, and with your own eyes you will see him, and you will say, my God, my Savior, and my King. Amen.